Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dark Pixel Podcast. My name is Mike.
My name is Landon.
I'm Kason.
Today, we're going to be talking about the Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition release date and price, which has all been announced. We finally know when it's coming. It's February 9th. You can buy it all for $20. Next topic,
skip that.
Lost.
I want to talk about it a little bit.
Topic number 2 will be some very early impressions of Lost Sphear. I was sent a copy by Square-Enix. I want to talk a little bit about my experience so far. I will do a full video on this soon. Could possibly be Monday's video. We'll see. I will also want to be talking about Dissidia Final Fantasy NT. So 2 games I got to let you guys know about my thoughts on. Topic number 3, Project Octopath Traveller has had many changes made to it due to the player feedback from the demo. I want to go over what some of those are and let you know just what huge beasts those dudes are from the video they made talking about all the awesome feedback that they got and the things that they're changing and working on.
Sounds very familiar.
Does sound familiar. Okay, then we got topics from the audience. Now, remember, these were mostly from last week, but our podcast was corrupted last week, so we're going over them again. RPG Scholar asks, do you think characters in JRPGs are lost in translation? Talking mostly about Final Fantasy XV with Noctis. And we could talk a little bit about Squall from FF8 as well. Is the English version of the character different from the Japanese version of the character in personality? Next topic is from Velhart, and he wants to know, well, the question is, some developers have stepped forward and claimed streamers are part of the reason for declining sales in single-player, story-focused games. What do you guys think about this? Okay. Chris Ewan, how would you rank the various Final Fantasies equipment systems? Good question. Hat89 is asking about emulation. Our thoughts on emulation. Is it good ever? Is it always bad? Thoughts on emulation. Hot topic, emulation. Squarehard wants to know about what we would like to see as possible DLC for Mario Odyssey. With the Nintendo Direct a few weeks ago, they announced the Luigi Balloon Collection thing, which he doesn't care for, and wants to know if we have any ideas on what could be cool. Chocolate Rob, as the last one here, would like to know our thoughts on ambiguous storytelling, and the question is sort of centered on Shadow of the Colossus for context there. So, and he also talks about FF Tactics a little bit too. Okay. The Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition will be released on February 9th. It's around the corner. I mean, it's just a week away or so. February 9th. It'll be released in chapters. So the first chapter is free, and then after that up to chapter 4, I think it's 99 cents. And then every additional chapter after that is $3.99, I think.
Because those chapters were more expensive to make.
Right, they're just charging you the cost of development.
That's all it is. Or you could buy the whole thing for $20. Now, the only thing I don't know, I haven't looked that hard, but from the thing I was reading, it didn't really specify, is whether or not that will include literally all the same content from the main Final Fantasy XV game. I mean, whether that's DLCs.
I've heard it's not
everything.
DLC. I've heard it is just the main. They specifically state the main story of Final Fantasy XV.
That's what I figured.
I don't think it includes any of the extra cutscenes or anything like that. I think it's just the original.
So no Ignis and Prompto and Gladio DLC. None of the stuff that's probably coming. I mean, maybe they'll release it at some point. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And they also condensed the world quite a bit. It's not as big as
which makes sense.
It was. Yeah, which I'm okay with.
It's got to fit in your pocket.
Exactly.
What's the world in your pocket?
Like you run across the freeway outside of the gas station and you're already fighting scorpions. Like not too long after that. It's not like you have to go that far.
You know, if anyone out there knows better and can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that this is a vanilla Final Fantasy XV released year and a half ago, whenever it was, base game that we got at launch day. but the mobile version. Okay, for $20. So let's talk about that.
Except cool? Better, because this is the definitive edition of that vanilla, of the original game. It looks better. Characters look better. Everything looks better.
I will say for the record, I hate the look of those characters.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's wonderful. I think every Final Fantasy forever should have a demake like this. And I do have a little bit okay, the hair looks cool, the chibi bodies, I don't mind that at all. Animate their mouths, though. Make their mouths move. Because right now they're just weird, awkwardly smiling at each other all the time while the dialogue is being spoken.
Is the voice acting not in it?
Voice acting is in it.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's
I don't know if it's every
delivery?
line. Yeah, it appears to be. I don't know if it's every line. I think they've cut a few out for brevity. But sorry. That's too funny. Okay. But it does have voice acting, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. I think this is where they took all the feedback that people were wanted a hotter Cindy.
Yeah, and they were like, realistically, we can't do that. But if it's a cartoon girl, we can make her
way hotter.
I am going to be buying it, and
I will say that I'm in favor of demakes.
Me too.
That you're talking about. I'm in favor of them looking like PlayStation 1 level character models. Except for, I guess Squall's face is pretty jacked in FF8, to be honest. You look at that in high definition, his face is messed up. But,
yeah, it's pretty weird.
But because he's got a strong angle to his nose, and so his eyes are not quite level. So it's just messed up looking.
Yeah,
anyways,
that's funny.
I'll clean him up a little bit, but I'm totally okay with that. But this particular character style does not jive with me. I don't like the faces.
Final Fantasy, World of Final Fantasy, it's a bit too that, right?
Oh, it feels a little Four Heroes of Light kind of, what's their faces that do the Bravely series?
Yeah,
feels like in that vein.
There's something about just the dots for eyes and the real simplicity of the faces that feels kind of like you're saying, they're in the cutscenes and they're looking at each other very blankly with this
pretty blank
smile and no eye. Their eyes are dead, and
they blink every now and then.
It just
the whole eye goes squish and goes back up.
I don't like the style. I don't like the style of it, but I'm on board with a different style character demake.
Then so not just a D-res of the original, right? Like a totally redone character.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But just in a
I like that too. Yeah.
But yeah, you can pick up. I'm sure there are many Final Fantasy 15 detractors out there who are ready to comment about.
Come at me,
I'm absolutely well, not at you, but at the company for being yeah, I'll buy the base game that sucked for $20.
Oh wait, so add that to the total, right? Because people were saying with Final Fantasy 15 that now that the new the new final edition that includes the Royal package. That if they buy that on top of all the DLC, they've spent over $100, and now they have to buy this too. Square-Enix.
Yes, and you have to buy the one. You have to buy.
Well, I just feel it's kind of odd that. Well, maybe they just haven't announced it yet, but that they wouldn't at least have plans to include the extra content in this version of the game as well.
Yeah, I wonder if this version sells well. I'll bet you they'll start patching it with that content, charging $3 or $4 for an extra episode. I could see that happening. I also could see this version of the game ending up on the Nintendo Switch, which is the only hesitation in me buying it right as soon as it comes out.
Get it on the phone or whatever.
Yeah, because I'd rather have it on the Switch,
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird, and I'm really curious about how it will play.
Yeah,
how it will.
I've seen it. He kind of does his own auto thing, and you just kind of switch the weapons with the right, and then you have your D-pad on the left. But I don't know how you dodge. I don't know how you switch between attacking and dodging. There's got to be some other thing I'm missing there.
A lot of mobile RPGs, in Japan, are auto battle generally. So, yeah, we'll see.
It's like RuneScape. RuneScape was fun.
That's the style I should have gone for. Finally, they should have gone RuneScape, original RuneScape engine.
Yeah, the original classic.
That's That's a demake I can get into.
That's a real demake right there.
Just lighting fires, 20 fires in a row.
That's right. People would do that. Yeah. Go into a forest, chop down trees, and just like get a huge like block of fire.
Hang around Lumbridge, you know. Just,
yeah.
That's what we need.
Oh, that game was wonderful. Those are good times.
In any case, we'll know about FF15 Pocket Edition soon enough. We'll probably talk about it again soon.
I'll probably make a video about it once I get my hands on it.
So let me know if any of you are going to get it. And we'll gauge from that whether or not this will be a successful project for Square-Enix. Vote in the top corner. Are you buying this or not? If it's not, if it's more than 60% not buying, then I don't know. Maybe we won't get that Arden DLC either.
But you could not buy and only play Chapter 1, right?
Well, true. It's free.
Buy it.
People aren't planning on buying it, but they might after they play the free
chapter. If anyone wants an informed opinion, they should at least play Chapter 1 for free before they come
out with all the hate.
Not buy.
I will do that and just see what it's like. And then I'll buy the Windows Edition. Okay.
March 6th, Windows Edition, by the way.
Let's see here. Actually, I'm not going to buy the Windows Edition when it comes out because I want the freaking real definitive final.
Once all the DLC is said and done, yeah.
That's the one I want to buy, so I'll buy that one later.
And then it's got to go $5 Steam sale, so it'll be
it might by then.
I've noticed that base games always make it to $5 on Steam sales at some point, but if you're going to get it with the Game of the Year, everything version, it never goes below $9.99 ever. It's always locked right there. So maybe I will. I don't know. We'll see.
Preserve that value.
Actually, that's not a bad idea. I think I'll wait for the freaking definitive Windows version to be $9.99 in like 3 years from now.
So the game that came out 2016, Mike will have a review for it by 2019. Don't worry, guys, it's coming.
Better believe it. The pace that I do these fetching reviews. Let's move on to our next topic. This will be real quick. So I got Lost Sphear. I've played 2 hours into it so far, and I actually have really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
I like it better than I Am Setsuna. So there's a couple things I wanted to talk about or just touch on real quick, and I'll go into more detail on this later. But I wanted to at least get something out there since they had sent me a copy of the game and wanted me to talk about it. So basically, like a lot of the things that were complained about in I Am Setsuna, that being the world is entirely snow-driven and it looks all the same, the soundtrack being only piano.
There were no inns in I Am Setsuna.
There was no inns.
That was
to rest at.
Yeah.
The battle system being sort of uninspired or too derivative of Chrono Trigger. Without the soul that game had story-wise or whatever. And then also the story itself being too derivative of Final Fantasy X with this like recurring cycle of sacrifice, human sacrifice to sort of keep at bay this, apocalypse or whatever. Okay, so all of those things have been addressed in this game. The story feels a lot more original. The idea is that, well, if I put it this way, it doesn't seem original, but the nothing is coming and erasing everything, and
of course.
And the character has to go and sort of like recover these memories and then take those memories back to the place and restore the towns and the world back to its previous state. So I like the premise there. I think it's pretty good. I think its delivery is probably a bit debatable. Some people would probably think it's pretty dry or not very exciting, or I find it to be serviceable. It's nothing special, but I do enjoy the premise at least. Characters, I think, again, some people might call them uninspired, but I like the music a lot. I feel like the art, like the towns and the world map and stuff, like graphics wise, it's not quite as nice or crisp or pristine, or I don't know, it just doesn't look quite as good to me as Setsuna did. You look at the trees and the towns.
I see that.
And
Setsuna had that really cool, like your footprints would kind of trail behind you in the snow as you were walking. That, and there were certain things they could do with the snow, with having particles everywhere. It made it look nicer, I think, than they can do with this current one.
from what I've played so far, which is, again, not that far, I feel like I Am Setsuna is a better looking game overall, but there's more diversity here. The world is not just snow-driven, right? You have different looking places and different areas of the world you can go to. So that, at least, I think is one, nice thing that they addressed there. And the battle system, too, while there are still similar elements there, one thing that I thought is really cool, and we'll see how it plays into it later, but when you go to attack, it's not just purely like a command-based in the sense that you just go down the list and select your ability and they do it. You can select attack, but then you can run the character around the arena into a position behind the enemy or something like that, and then select it, and then they'll run over there and attack from that side. And subsequently, as like a long-range attacker, you can move around the map into a position where you'll hit 2 enemies in a line with your attack, versus if you had just stayed in your previous position, you'd only would have hit 1. So I feel like there's an element of positioning that will be important, and will add a layer of strategy. And it moves quickly, so it's like the ATB is going up for all the other characters. You're on a character, say their menu comes up and you want to attack and move them over here. At the same time, another person's ATB has filled up and they're ready to go too. So it's like, oh, I got to get you in position and fire so that I can move this guy and get him into place to do his thing, because the monster's turn's going to come up again. But you still got to press Y at the right time in order to get that like extra damage. So there's a little bit of timing involved in that. And so, like, I found at least that getting the timing down for moving this guy into position, attacking, selecting for this guy to move, actually moving him in the midst of moving him, seeing the time come up for the Y, pressing Y with the right timing, while I'm moving this guy, pressing Y at the right time to get the extra damage, and then moving this guy into position, all handling that at once. I've been successful at that, or learned how to do that pretty well, and it's pretty satisfying. It takes what would be just sort of like your run-of-the-mill battle system, and I think just adds an element to it that makes it more engaging and more exciting. So I've really enjoyed it so far. So yeah, those are my quick impressions of Lost Sphear. I really like it, and I'll talk more in depth about it in the coming days.
Oh, so it sounds like I Am Setsuna is the spiritual successor to Chrono Trigger, and Lost Sphear is the spiritual successor to Quest 64. People complained. They went back to the drawing board, looked for new inspiration.
And they're like, you can move around and attack from a different place.
Basically, that's what I'm trying to say.
Perfect.
All right. So, yeah. Talk more about Lost Sphear at a later time. Project Octopath Traveller. So I've got a link here. Maybe I should send it to you guys.
Yeah, I was
like
able
that.
to take a look at that.
But
sending it to you now.
This Project Octopath, just the idea that they asked for feedback and are attempting to implement some of it, I think Hajime Tabata has had a pretty big impact on the way that Square-Enix runs things now.
I think so too.
Yeah, and it's mostly a good thing. He's helping to restructure the company, and the way he did things, I think they see the value in that type of approach, and it's showing here. I think it's great.
Now, keep in mind, what Kaysen is talking about is not artistic direction as much as
No.
executive direction.
Exactly. What Hajime Tabata did is he came in and he changed the culture of the work environment. Instead of, it didn't maybe result in the best artistic story, whatever, but it did result in more efficiency, especially at the lower levels. And it resulted in a more flat, even workspace where people weren't afraid to share their ideas because they weren't one of the project leads. So that, and also Hajime Tabata would regularly ask the fans for their opinions, and he would implement changes based on their reactions to the demos that he was putting out. Like Square-Enix used to not do that. They would not engage fans up until just a few years ago, Yep. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a video here. So it's like an interview with a bunch of the developers on Octopath, and they're talking about, well, a lot of it is just kind of excessive praise of players. Like your feedback is just invaluable.
That's
to
very
us.
Japanese. That's very. They're being very respectful to their loyal customers.
what you would expect, right? But the content of what they're talking about,
that's very Japanese.
the content of what they're talking about changing is, I think, overall really, really positive. For the most part, I loved that demo. I thought it was fantastic.
That's the best demo I've ever played.
Yeah, it's my most anticipated game of this entire year. I am looking forward to Octopath more than any other game. So despite all of that, they're still tweaking and improving it, and in ways that I think will ultimately be very good. So they've got like a whole transcription of everything that was said here. I'm just going to try and scroll through and kind of like pick up the parts that I thought were really good. One thing that I think is really a good thing is that they're going to have a slider or some kind of customizable way for you to tone down the bloom effect. That like real bright sort of like
I noticed a lot of people were complaining about it. I liked it in terms of the atmospherics and the the effects that they were putting on what obviously would otherwise be an 8-bit look. But I guess some people didn't like it as much. That's fine. Well,
I think that it did make certain elements on the characters or in the environments feel overexposed to
it
didn't look super good to me. So the ability to tone it back a bit would be nice.
They had a bit of a Bleach bypass kind of feel. Where highlights roll off very rapidly, like you clip them almost. And so but my question is, there's a slider. Can I increase it? From the
Make it more powerful?
I want more of that.
Actually, I don't know if it's a slider. Now that I think about it, I think
it might just be a high, medium, low kind of thing.
I believe that it was just a toggle. Because I think it's called I think they called it like HD2D or 2D HD or something like that.
Okay.
So I think there's just a toggle of turning that on and off, and I think that, if you look at the video, you'll see the difference between the show.
The only thing that bothered me really badly about the look in the demo was the vignetting, because sometimes
that was pretty heavy.
The corner of the screen would be so heavily vignetted that it would be like, what's right there? I can't just look
when you
there
were in the caves, it was already so dark.
So that's one thing I would personally like to be able to dial back as well.
Sorry, I'm just reading over this. It says your invaluable and profuse feedback has helped us to find so many ways to
your profuse feedback. That's saying, hey, trolls, we hear you. You don't need to be so loud.
Okay, here. One of the issues many of you raised was that it was a hassle to get around. In the demo, you had to toggle between walking and running with the B button, which I think is fine.
I think most games
the way it is.
Do that.
That's the way it has been in RPGs for freaking decades, right?
Right.
I don't know why people. But anyways, they've made it so that you'll run automatically. There's like a a gradient on the analog stick.
Yeah, so, that's interesting.
Like as you move it all the way over, he'll run, and as you move it, in between, like the speeds will vary, it seems. So that's one change that they made. I don't really care about that one. It is what it is. And then they've also increased how fast you can run. So there's you can go even faster when you're running. However, to keep game balance, they're going to make the encounter rate higher if you're going at full speed. So if you're running at full speed, you'll get more encounters.
Oh, so it's not like you can bypass.
So you just truck through and
time-wise.
Yeah.
All right, well that's fine too, I guess.
We hope these refinements will help players get around the world with a minimum of stress. Is what they say. Were people stressed out trying to get around in that game? I don't know.
It's just an RPG. I wonder, a lot of the feedback that they were getting must not have been from people who play RPGs, which is fine.
No, dude, it's not people who play RPGs. It's Nintendo people who
have a good point.
Have not played RPGs because Nintendo never gets RPGs.
You know what? That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
What is this game? I've never heard of this kind of turn-based combat before.
There wasn't an enemy there. How did a battle happen?
I can't jump on his head and kill him.
It's called a random encounter, people. Pokemon, I don't know. Anyways,
I know. I'm just kidding, but Nintendo.
No, that is a good point, though.
The Switch
Nintendo,
is getting so many JRPGs, like so many. I think it's going to be the JRPG platform, to be completely honest, in this coming couple of years.
Which is a really good
which is crazy to go from what they were.
Right.
None of that.
The Wii,
Okay, so talking about your your gripe with vignetting, they don't specifically mention that here, but he says, likewise, we received a number of comments asking us to improve visibility to make traversable areas stand out more. We've adjusted wall and floor colors and added visible landmarks, among other changes. We've also added a feature that didn't make it in time for the demo, a radar to point players to exits, entrances, and other important
I kind of like that didn't exist, actually. But
I'm sure there will be a toggle for it.
Well, sure, but I'll play with it on if it's an option.
Well, if it's only pointing you towards an entrance or an exit, but not the next objective,
the waypoint.
No, right? I hate waypoints.
Here's how to get out. Here's how to get in. That's more like
that's not so
too
bad.
handholdy. I feel like.
I suppose so.
That's what they're doing.
To improve general visibility, we've also added settings so players can adjust screen brightness and the intensity of the HD 2D filters that some found distracting. So that's a good thing for a lot of
question people. Then, I mean, I just looked at a list rundown on Reddit of this. I haven't watched the video yet. Like a true Redditor, I just read the comments. But
upvoted the funny ones.
But does that mean you can tweak the depth of field? Because
I don't know.
I feel like the depth of field is being used kind of strategically in some ways to. So I don't know, like if you can just.
Because what they show in the video is not a moving image. It's just a character standing. She's holding like a lantern, but she's standing still. And I guess I could bust it open and just kind of like run over to that part real quick and see if there's a difference in the amount of blur, like camera blur.
I actually liked the depth of field because it helped to kind of condense the space that you were worried about to more or less a 2D plane. Yeah. Which is, it's a 2D game. Well, it's essentially a 2D game, right? And that helped because, when everything's in focus, you get the impression that you can go there. And you usually can't go to the... But by having the depth of field come in, for those of you who aren't aware of depth of field, I think most people know, right? Just the camera's blurring effect to things that are in the background and foreground, essentially. Having those not be so visible it kept the whole game on a 2D plane for me, which and
it makes it feel miniature, like
it's like a tilt shift
because it was a little tilt shifty.
I thought that was. I really do get the impression, even the light bleeds and everything.
Oh man,
the fact that it's so much that it's like, oh my gosh, we're like minuscule here. We're dealing with a little tiny toy. I thought that.
So I've full screened the image here, and what I'm seeing is that the characters, basically almost the entire character is blown out by exposure-wise from the lantern she's holding.
So they picked a spot where it was that bright.
And then in the background, I see like it's way blurred out in the background.
Okay.
And so like there's a very shallow focus on the plane that she is currently on. And I skip forward to the area where they've changed it, and it is not nearly as heavy, though there is
change depth of field, huh?
A slight blur on the furthest objects in the image, but not nearly as heavy. She's not blown out anymore. Well, it's close, but it's not quite. So you can see more detail in the highlights on her sprite. And just generally speaking, visibility, like the colors, like the ground is much brighter. And it seems to me also that heavy vignette is not there. Yeah, the vignette seems to mostly be gone. There's maybe a little bit in the corners, but it's not like... In this first image, it's like, I would say, at least on my screen here, I don't know how helpful this will be to you, but it seems about like 4 inches from the edge of the screen on both sides. It's like almost completely blacked out.
Right.
But here, it's more like... Oh, come on. Give me that image again. Here, it's more like inch, maybe half inch.
That's good.
So it all comes in one package, though? It's like either the whole thing's off or the whole thing's
You either get it all on Or I mean, at least that's what it seems like,
we'll
because
leave it on
they're showing the menu here, and they're going down to the HD 2D option, and it's a toggle between one option or the other. So it looks like it's an on and off switch. Yeah.
Well,
there you go.
They can do whatever they want, I guess.
There are still particle effects and other things going on this one, but it's just not. It's not quite so well. It's just not there in terms of the huge blooming effect.
Right. It was much muchier before, is what you're saying.
Much more muchness.
It was a lot more muchness happening previously. Okay. So that's one major change that they've made. They're changing the UI. We're doing our best to address concerns regarding UI. Many of you expressed that the position of save slots made it too easy to accidentally overwrite your progress. So they've changed like the default of where your save file lands so that you don't accidentally save over. They're accommodating for morons here. We've adjusted the size of the help text. People were talking about it being difficult to read. They've made some changes to event scenes, it looks like. Skip function has been added to the demo, so you can skip scenes now. That's a big thing for a lot of people.
Yeah,
because
a lot of fight a boss more than once, right?
Yeah, you don't want to watch the whole scene over again. Actually, that's exactly what happened to me. I was pretty frustrated because I was fighting a boss the second time, and I was like, I don't want to listen to this again.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's good. Expressed concerns about message display speed. We've increased the default speed and made it customizable in the settings menu.
It's never fast enough in any RPG.
No, it never is. But now it's almost like it's just like in a blip, like the whole line of text is there, which is exactly what I always do by default because I'm pressing the button that gets it to quickly appear. So you don't have to do that anymore. Nice. They're making some changes to the battle system, which they're not going into detail of right now, but just adjusting balance and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of everything that's being changed. Overall, I think good improvements, good things to change for sure, for the most part. And I'm very excited for the game. And they're doing their best.
Me too.
That's pretty
leading up, their best.
Leading up to the release, it's getting pretty close. They're just trying to refine it, make it as good as they can. And it's nice that these are the kinds of tweaks they're making to the game versus, say, adding or cutting entire huge portions of story out. So they're just trying to like really tweak it and make it good. So I have a good feeling about this game. I think it'll be very excellent for that reason.
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, let's move into our extremely interesting, heavy, introspective topics here from the audience, from you scholars and gentlemen. RPG Scholar wants to know, do you think characters in JRPGs are lost in translation? A lot of characters in JRPGs seem to act differently in Japanese versus how they do in English. The way they talk, to their personality, even the jokes that they say. Now, I didn't come up with this idea on my own. I saw a video on YouTube from a YouTuber named Valkyrie Aurora. He gave me a link to that. I'll put that in the video description if you guys are curious to watch. Love to see what you guys think about the topic. Keep up the good work. We were all talking about, Landon had also seen this video a while ago. I remember watching it too, probably around the time she uploaded it back when the game was still new. And just to kind of quickly breeze through this, she's analyzing, in particular, the little scenes, like really short little sequences that happen when you do like I forget what they're called in the game, but they're little side quests, little optional things you can do with each of the characters.
Oh, where they're one-on-one, right?
Yeah, Noctis goes off alone. Yeah, like the affinity missions or whatever. But they go. Noctis goes off with one of the other guys, and they do something, and then they kind of come back, and it's like they bonded, right? So she's specifically looking at the dialogue of the characters as they're coming back from one of those missions. The one that was majorly different in English was the one with Gladio, because Gladio is sort of teasing him like, hey, like, great job out there or whatever. Or at least in English, it doesn't seem like he's teasing him. He's just giving him a compliment, like, hey, great job. That was awesome work or whatever. And then Noctis has this sort of like it's teasing. It's not it's not the real arrogance, but he's sort of just like, yeah, I'm awesome, like obviously I'm great or whatever. It's the dumb little dialogue that they throw in there to say this thing is now over, get back to the game. In Japanese, what Gladio says, and I'm just looking at the text, I'm not talking about context in terms of listening or understanding, but from what the text says, it seems pretty much the same. Hey, great work, something along those lines. And Noctis seems to be at first a bit frustrated or irritated by that, as if there was a suggestion there that, hey, for once in your life, you actually tried at something.
Right.
And he goes like, hey, like, cut it out. Like, I can do well if I try, which is totally different from what he says in English. Like 100% different.
Yeah.
Now, the difference between the one with Prompto is not much different, because I think that there is a cultural sort of hierarchy in the way that you interact with people who are older than you versus people who are the same age as you. And Prompto is either the same age or younger, so Noctis is a little bit more like, hey, you were only able to do that because of me, right? In Japanese as well. But when he talks to Ignis in English, again, it's the same kind of thing. Hey, thank you for your help or whatever. Like, yeah, man, like, I'm the greatest. I'm so cool. I'm so good. In English versus Japanese, where he says something like, oh, do you think so? In that case, that's great, or something like that. So much more respectful when speaking to Ignis, who in some ways kind of like raised the kid, watched over him for a long time, took care of him. So I guess what we're looking at here is it necessarily a change in character or personality, or is it more of this is a cultural thing that people adhere to when speaking to senpai or someone older than them, or is it an actual change of personality that they, when they translated that, it was like, well, he's with his buddies. All of these people, despite their age, are his friends, and so he'll talk the same to all of them because that's how it would go with an English speaker. Or is this just we want Noctis to be more like this because Western audiences will like a character who exhibits this kind of confidence more than someone who's real timid like this person?
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that?
Well, this is funny because we already
talked about it.
We did this podcast last week, but there are some things I'll try to stick to what I had mentioned before and not go too much into what you had said before, Mike. But there is the idea of like the main character in the West being somebody more like Bruce Willis's character in Die Hard. What's his name?
John McClane. John
McClane. Or like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone. I know I'm going like 80s, 90s here, but like even more modern. People who exhibit that, like King Leonidas or a lot of the Marvel heroes, Tony Stark. That's probably the best example right there. Tony Stark. That is what American audiences freaking love. They want somebody like Tony Stark who's arrogant but can back it up, and who, exits on the stage to music and a girl in each arm. And American audiences look at that and they're like, sweet. Japanese audiences, I think, are a little bit different. What they look for in a character isn't so much somebody who's obviously arrogant and good at what they do. They want somebody more like Zatoichi, or like somebody who is good at what they do, but they don't show off. Like the only time that, like, Akira Kurosawa did this a lot in his movies, like in Ronin. Oh, what's it called?
Rashomon, or
not Rashomon? It's called something Ronin. It's a number. Something Ronin. Anyways, the character doesn't use his sword basically the whole movie, right? And you don't know how good he is, and he doesn't tell you how good he is. He's not going around bragging to people. But as soon as he pulls out that sword and he does the coolest thing you've ever seen and he puts it away, like, that is awesome. Like somebody who is humble, somebody who's respectful, they don't show off, but when they need to, they can literally do whatever they want to do, right? And that's the kind of character, and I'm speaking in generalities right now, it's not always the case, but that's the kind of main character that the Japanese person would be like, that's who I want to emulate, right? And so the idea of Noctis coming across more arrogant, more gruff, more, rough around the edges, more like that, I suppose, would be like a localization of the character as opposed to just localizing the dialogue, as opposed to just localizing the story. They localize who Noctis is so that Western audiences will like him better and make him fit to the Western archetypes of, I don't know, just an invincible, arrogant hero as opposed to the humble but talented hero.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Oh, but
I don't like it. I don't like the idea of localizing a character. Mm-hmm. Like, localize all the words, change that however you want, make it flow. But when you localize the people of the story, unless that was planned from the get-go, you can run into some problems story-wise.
Sure. Yeah.
Because this character wouldn't have done that, but you just changed some things so that the Americans would like him more, but now your character's motivations don't make as much sense.
Yeah, I think this is where, like, sometimes video games, if you're localizing a video game, oftentimes you'll have, like obviously a large team of people, but there'll typically be one person who's the editor who's really trying to make it all
cohesive.
Cohesive.
Yeah,
to have
that's
an
right.
identity, because if you were to ask 10 people to write a book together, you're gonna have some tonal shifts in places if you don't have somebody who can have that final say to be like, this isn't flowing anymore. And so sometimes you run into that with video games where maybe a manga being translated can just be done by one guy. Like a really good guy to follow on Twitter who talks about this a lot is Zach Davison. He translates a lot of manga, and he's a really, really interesting guy. But he talks about the idea that when someone is translating something or localizing, really, when somebody's localizing something, the fact is that is your author now, that person.
Right, that's the writer. Yeah.
So obviously a good translator / localizer will take what was written and not just do this is so controversial, but not just do a transliteration. They'll do and they'll flesh it out so that it sounds good and flows good in the language and everything. So stuff like this, where it's it was these couple scenes that don't jive with what we feel or know about Noctis in the rest of the game,
right,
then that to me is where it's the editor didn't do their job. That slipped under the radar, right? They should have been he's not really this kind of guy. You know what I mean? You need to have that person have that final say there. If the entire game, however, has been localized to have what you're talking about,
then
that kind
works
of tone,
a little better.
Then it's hey, this is just who this is. But when it's
because we wouldn't know any different.
And I still get people being upset about that. Somebody would make a video like Valkyrie Aurora did and be every much in their own right to say, well, wait a minute, he's not as mean in Japanese.
And that's funny, because that would essentially mean the Japanese people played a different game than the one you played.
And that is
with
the
a
case.
Different main character.
That is the case with most video games, unfortunately. You know what I mean?
So you can't really have a conversation unless it's just about mechanics, because things won't line up. I mean, it's not that bad yet, but I'm just saying it could get bad as things progress.
I would say hopefully the differences in that's why it's important really in the hiring of who's doing the localization. That's why Square-Enix has in-house people for that now, where they didn't used to.
They didn't just have
they shifted, because as they're working on something, they can keep somebody in the loop who understands what the tone is and all that. But I don't know, I understand people being upset about this kind of thing. Ideally, it really should only be marginal differences. It shouldn't be a massive character shift. But again, if it's something that feels out of place here, I would almost say that was the editor's falls back on the editor, I would say. Is the editor of any book that somebody puts out is the one who ultimately needs to have actually made sure that it's tonally consistent and all that stuff. You know what I mean? So that's where it comes in for me. But.
Sure. Mike, you mentioned something about Gladio, and about how Gladio would kind of tease Noctis a little bit about oh, you're actually good at fighting, and Noctis is shut up, right? I feel like that almost is its own mistaken cohesion from back when Tetsuya Nomura wanted Noctis to be really tired and sleepy. He sleeps in too much, and that whole part of Noctis that kind of got ignored in the more, I don't know, in the final version of the game, I guess, where like that's something that you would say to somebody who like you don't see them do things very often, right? And you're like, oh wow, you can actually fight. I feel like that would have made a little more sense if Noctis had been revealed to be this sleepyhead kind of a little bit lazy kind of character, you know.
Yeah, that's true. That was a major part of the original character, and that was even in as late as the Duskai demo. Because the Duskai demo opens up with them waking up. There's a buzzing alarm, and Noctis is sleeping through it, and everyone else is trying to get him to wake up. They're like, "Fetch! Like, wake up, please! Like, we have to go."
Knocking on his head.
They're knocking on his head, dude, and then he's like just totally like zonked, like just not waking up. Right? So that element of the character was removed pretty far into development.
And I think that's why it just seems so weird when Gladio's almost teasing him, you know?
Yeah, and that could have been, because there's actually another piece of dialogue, even in the English version, that I've only encountered one time, but Prompto says something about insomnia being a city that never sleeps, or something like that. And then Noctis says something about, like waking up like afternoon every day. I'm totally paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly what they said. I've only heard it once, and it was a freaking long time ago. But you'll hear like lose the jacket because they're like, oh, it's hot, and then Gladio will be like, lose the jacket. You'll hear that dialogue 7,000 times.
Or
playing.
Hello, opening.
You'll hear that a million times. But this one particular thing, I only heard one time in my, I don't know how many hours of play that I played that game, but it felt like something that they had forgotten to remove, that had been left over from the previous like story.
You're the only witness,
had been
dude.
changed.
That's right.
So what you're talking about with the way Gladio teases him about being lazy and not trying and whatever could have also been an element of that for sure.
I feel like, because what we're talking about is things being lost in translation, so to speak, right? And this scene doesn't make as much sense in the grand scheme of things because they localize the character. But I feel like switching directors, just the original story itself didn't quite survive that whole process, and that there's some dissonance in the characters and the way that we think they should act, just based on that alone, not even going into the localization of the whole thing, you know?
Yeah. I'll just say, as someone who doesn't have, I don't know, a ton of credential to really like speak on this, because I haven't heard the Japanese and can't speak for it.
Right.
So I am 100% open to and invite localizing dialogue, so that you'll hear it and you won't be like, huh? That sounded weird. That didn't seem right. Because that's what Japanese would sound like. Japanese is, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of sentence structure, it's backwards from English, right?
Essentially, the clauses are flipped.
Yeah. So it'd be like Yoda talking. You know what I mean? Or like everything's backwards.
Exactly.
So you can't do that. I mean, in some form, you have to at least flip the sentence around.
Right.
But then in addition to that, as we've talked about many times in the past, they leave out a lot of words that in context, people just know what you mean. There's all kinds of reasons why a transliteration cannot work in English. It just would not make sense, and it would sound very, very, very strange and weird and bad.
And anyone who disagrees can fight with us in the comments below. We are right.
But you're wrong. You're just wrong. So, talking about, the necessary changes being applied, but at least be as faithful as possible, versus saying, no, I'm going to let my my localization team or my translator, I'm going to give him authorship and allow him or her to, kind of put their mark on this collaborative work. That's the reason why I feel Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy XII and Vagrant Story have such good dialogue.
Really good.
Is because Alexander O. Smith is a great writer. Yeah. And aside from being an excellent translator, really, really knows that mode of speech of English that he was using, and uses it to great effect. It's very, very powerful stuff. The language is beautiful that he puts in there. So I'm completely open to that, of changing the words to work with the audience that you're going for. I am more hesitant and maybe even confident enough to say that I do not want a character's personality to change from one to the other.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Because then your story is different. It's one thing if the words being said are different between characters, but they're more or less driving at the same thing and things happen in the same way. It's another thing entirely when the character is saying a 100% different thing, like in this case with Noctis, that makes him appear to be a different person. And so that I'm not on board with. That, to me, is a step too far.
You know, what you mentioned in your last video, Landon, about Japanese cultural influence on people's lives and where they first discovered it and all that stuff. So many people discovered Japanese culture through video games. And I think playing video games, it's transcendental in so many different ways. But one of them, it's a cultural exchange. When you're playing a game produced from a different culture and it's imported into your country and you have the opportunity, the privilege to play a game that was influenced greatly by another culture. And when the localization team decides to remove that culture's elements and, increase your own culture's elements for your own, for what they presume to be your own good or to better sell the game or whatever, you lose that cultural exchange that takes place when you play a game from somewhere else, because they just took out all their culture and added your own culture back into it. And maybe that appeals to you in certain ways, but you miss a lot of what I think makes not just video games, but Japanese video games really special.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough because localization is obviously, like we all know, it's different for translation, right? Localization is localizing a product for a region so that it makes sense in their context.
Sure.
So by definition, you should be doing some of those things.
Yeah, and localizing the
I agree with what you're saying. I know,
but not
I know
the
what
characters.
Saying,
like I draw a line somewhere. So you're right. I do allow it to a certain point, but I have a line, and my line's arbitrarily drawn. I recognize that, but I do feel it needs to be there.
I find that this is almost treated differently on a publisher by publisher basis. I feel like they have their own brand guidelines for like the way they want to handle this kind of thing. But like I would say Atlas is very much more like a lighter on the localization, at least ideally.
Right. Their games are clearly Japanese, except they did change the city in, was it Persona 3? They changed the city to like Los Angeles or something.
Well, you might be thinking of Capcom did that with.
Was that something else? Oh, was it Ace Attorney? I could have sworn it was Persona. But okay,
they made it like a San Fran.
Tokyo.
I did make it like it's LA, but it's like
it's definitely supposed to be Tokyo.
Yeah. I thought it was Persona.
He's like looking out the window at freaking like absolutely 100% Japanese.
Yeah.
Like, LA nights are so whatever.
It's
see, that's too far. It's like I get that, but don't do that.
So
it's okay to still be in Japan.
Like different publishers have different audiences that they've kind of drawn in, partly because of decisions they've made with things like that, right? They're like, Xseed is going to localize stuff and understand that the people that are into what they localize are like way into Japan, and so they're gonna be lighter on that kind of stuff. But like if we show the first example that comes to my head is if you've ever tried to show your parents an anime that you like, and you're like, all of a sudden
awkward, dude.
You get like really like self-conscious and aware of like, well, wait, they don't like get any of this,
right?
Not even a weird anime, just
just something simple as like a female character talking.
Sure.
Is like, wait, mom and dad leave. Like, for some reason, it's just like something about anime. It's the way it's localized. The way that a lot of the girls talk, they have really high whiny voices, and the way they dress is provocative. And it's just like, never mind. I didn't.
My mom.
I don't want you here, parents.
My mom hated the Pokemon anime so much that she would freaking turn the TV off in the middle of an episode.
Is it because of Misty, right? It's because of Misty.
I can't stand this anymore. Like, the way they talk is just so... Like, go read, go do something. I feel like your brain cells are dying watching this.
Right. That's hilarious, because my daughter this morning, I walked in through the door. She's 6 months old now, almost 7. She was watching Teletubbies.
Oh.
And I was like... well, I wasn't there. I'm not the one that put it on, but I remember thinking like I was never going to be a parent that had my kid watch Teletubbies. I don't know why. I just had that preconceived idea in my heart, like because Teletubbies came out when I was like 13, and I was like, oh, this is so messed up, right?
It was weird.
And anyways, my kid watches Teletubbies, so
oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't know. There's just different thresholds, like you said. I think that's a good point. Like you have your line
Different lines,
where it works for you, and there's nothing that's going to work universally. I think you're going to have people upset either way. But like you're saying, Mike, I agree with you too. Like, don't change a character to be saying things the opposite,
right? Especially if it doesn't fit with the story.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And I feel like that is a problem with the editor just not doing their job in that instance. If it's only in part of the game. If it's the entire freaking game, then apparently someone made a really weird decision to flip things around for whatever reason. I don't know. Sure. That kind of thing happens, like Fire Emblem stuff.
Right.
You know, you have two people talking about how like they're both assassins, and oh man, like isn't it crazy? Like you've killed so many people. How do you sleep at night? You know, it's like I don't know, man, I don't. And then it gets brought over to English, and then it's they just stare at each other. ... And the other guy stares back. ... And he stares back. ... And it makes it a funny thing. Yeah, stuff like that. You just changed. You probably went too far.
That's too far, man. That's too far.
And that's real. That is a real example.
That actually
is real.
That's not fake. That's real. Okay, good question, RPG Scholar. Hopefully we've touched on it sufficiently for you. Next question comes from Velhart. Some developers have stepped forward and claimed streamers are part of the reason for declining sales in single-player story-focused games. What do you guys think about this? Now, the video, which again will be in the description, that he has linked here is to a video from The Know, and in that video they are referring to an interview with Amy Hennig, who was an executive at Naughty Dog, and worked on Uncharted games, and I believe for a time worked on The Last of Us, and then was it her that like she left the company in the middle of that over creative differences or something? I can't remember who it was. Somebody left the company during the production of The Last of Us who had been a prominent Uncharted developer over this like disagreement about what direction to take The Last of Us. It might have been her, I don't remember. In any case, that's who she is. She used to work for them. So she's worked on prominent, very story-focused, linear video games. Okay? She's claiming, apparently, that streamers and Let's Players are part of the reason why these kinds of games are declining in sales. First of all, I guess now I've had 2 weeks to try and look this up, and I still haven't.
Well,
I want to see if it's actually true that those games are declining in sales. Now, one thing I brought up last week that I think is just unbelievably important when you're talking about an issue like this is what data is she pulling from to make this claim? And does that data control for very, very important factors, such as, is the game good?
Right.
Was it well received and respected by gamers at large? And then did they still not buy it? Okay, first thing to control for. Is the game actually good? Second thing to control for. The Let's Players and streamers who are putting the content online, the people watching them are subscribed to them, follow them, want to know their take on something.
Right, likely watch a lot of their videos.
Right. How many of those people watched the entire Let's Play having no interest whatsoever in the beginning of buying that game? Not interested in buying that game, but like the guy, so they watch his Let's Play from beginning to end because they like him. Never had any intention whatsoever. Or how many of those people were maybe interested in it, watched the first episode and were like, I don't think I really want to buy this game. However,
and then
I will watch the rest of it to see what happens in the story or whatever. Okay, these are things that are very important to control for in this data, because you can't say it's the Let's Player's fault if the person had no intention of buying the game in the first place and they watched the Let's Play.
Yeah. I just had another scenario I thought of. How many of these people are leaving Let's Plays on playing at home so their dog doesn't feel lonely when they're off at work? How do
you control for that?
I know. You gotta. That's tough.
So maybe somebody in the comments can send me a link to the data that Amy Hennig is referring to when she's saying this, or if there is any. I'm, again, kind of, it's so many things I feel like I'm repeating, but I'm not, because you guys never heard it. But last week we sort of touched on, like, is there any data at all, or are they just saying this? We were trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, they must have
something.
They must have done surveys or collected data somehow so that she could stand confidently in an interview and say that single-player story-focused games are declining in sales. So if that's happening and we have data for that, please let me know. I'd like to see that. Because as of right now, I'm not even sure I'm willing to accept that, because I look at the sales of Uncharted 4 being nearly 10 million, and it's just like, what are you talking about? You know,
right?
The latest Uncharted game, I believe it's called The Lost Legacy, was like a kind of like a side story thing with two of the female characters,
right,
smaller scope in terms of project, and that one did not break 2 million sales. I don't know if it was projected to, and I highly doubt that it cost $100 million to make that game.
Yeah.
When all the asset creation and much of the animation and things of that nature had already been done for Uncharted 4 as the first PS4 Uncharted game, or this latest generation Uncharted game. Mm-hmm. So she's talking about the cost of games, and she mentions this specifically being $100 million. And so in order to not only break even, but then make enough money in profit to justify then turning around and making another one, I would assume you got to be more in the 3 to 4 million sales figures. Like that becomes the new bar. Like you've got to get up to that point, and that's a lot. That's a lot of sales. And
not very many games actually make that threshold.
Square-Enix, remember a few years ago, they were very disappointed in Tomb Raider and Hitman and Deus Ex for not reaching like 5 million copies sold. And we're all sitting here going, who in their right mind thinks Deus Ex is going to sell 5 million copies?
None of those, Tomb Raider might have been the closest, but none of those games had that potential to sell 5 million copies.
The only reason they would be disappointed or expect that is if they're spending $100 million to make a Deus Ex game.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I think the real issue here is that you're spending $100 million to make a game. You're ballooning this industry out of control.
Yeah, the inefficiencies are just rampant at that level.
Yeah, and you've got to find a way to cut back, because this is something Kason brought up last week too when we originally recorded this. You have indie developers or mid-sized level developers making games that people are buying in the droves that are breaking millions of sales. Let's talk about maybe Stardew Valley or something.
Sure.
And the dude made it by himself.
Yeah, one guy.
Made a game that compels people, and millions of people bought it.
Or
and
Hellblade, that was probably done on a small budget.
Yes, Hellblade is, I think, a really good example, because that's at least a game
that looks super good.
Yes, in terms of its production value, is comparable to a AAA level game. Totally. In terms of its facial animation, its sound and audio design, and everything that goes into it. It looks like a AAA video game that was made by a mid-sized developer, totally self-published, and was sold at $30 at launch rather than $60, and has been very, very successful. So I look at that model, I look at what they did, and I say that's the real solution to this problem, not taking away Let's Players and streamers' ability to share these games with their audience. And pointing the fame of Blinger,
nice, that was good.
The finger of blame, pointing the finger of blame at people who, according to this other study, which I will also link in the description, a Gamma Sutra article, that shows, and this isn't a perfect one-to-one comparison because it's evaluating Papers, Please, which is not one of these kinds of games we're talking about. It's not a single player, well, I think it is single player, but it's not a story-focused, linear, like cinematic type game. But what it did show is that as soon as Total Biscuit and these big Let's Players and YouTube personalities covered the game, search traffic and sales for the game spiked in a big way. So there is at least a strong correlation there and I think a lot of developers and publishers realize this, which is why they send us copies of the game and say, please stream this and please do videos on this. A lot of maybe sometimes they'll say you can only stream up to a certain point or whatever.
That usually happens, yeah.
But it obviously is working out. It's getting the word out there. It's cheaper marketing than putting a commercial during a sporting event where 80% of the people who will see that have no interest in your product.
They will never play your game, yeah.
Whereas if you send the copy to Total Biscuit, every person watching is a potential buyer. It's very targeted advertising here, very targeted marketing that you can't get anywhere else. And you're going to sit here and blame these people for your declining sales instead of looking inward and saying, maybe I made a crap game. And when the people saw it, they didn't like it and didn't want to buy it. It's just absurd to me.
Which reminds me, okay, I'm remembering a point that I brought up in the failed podcast, which we will forever have to refer to that as the failed podcast. Mass Effect Andromeda.
Oh, yes.
Were that game not to have been streamed, would people have known how crappy it was before they bought it? It may have sold more copies had it not been streamed and people couldn't see the animation quality and the weird aspects of the game before purchasing it. But and I could see people being like, oh, if it weren't for darned YouTube, right? But you've got to look at yourself when that happens. Like EA screwed up on that game, and sure, everybody knew about the poor aspects of your game, but you had really poor aspects in your game. That's your fault. The fact that YouTube came around and showed everybody how weird it was, and then everybody decided, I'm going to pass on this one, that's not YouTube's fault. YouTube did nothing at that moment, YouTube, right? Then speak the truth. And the video game company didn't like that. But you can never fault a group that's doing that.
If Mass Effect Andromeda came out in 1999, what would have happened is people who subscribe to the gaming publications,
all the magazines,
would have seen some bad reviews, or some middle of the road reviews, because that was more of a middle of the road review game. But what that would have done is people would not have been as interested in buying the next one. And no matter what, you've screwed your franchise.
Right.
Like it doesn't matter. Like that somebody could stream it and see it and see what happened or what. Like anybody who paid for your game is going to think twice about paying for it again.
Exactly.
And you've done that damage to your brand. That is your own fault.
Yeah.
And so that is just information just travels quicker with the way the internet works now. And you can't blame the speed that information travels at, because what is the information? What's being shared? Oh, something bad about you because you did something bad? Okay. What are you going to do? Turn off the internet? Like, what the freak?
I know, seriously. It's like the only solution to that is censorship. And that's like, you did it. People are just showing that you did what you actually did.
Yeah,
it's not...
this is where Nintendo, they gave a GDC talk last year, and they talked about this exactly. They were saying, like, how do you make a video game that people can look up solutions to puzzles, and people can look up guides and walkthroughs and watch all the cutscenes online? How do you make a video game that people still, even after all that, really want to play? And their solution was a lot of the crap that you see getting shared about
Nintendo Labo, dude. Oh, well, Breath of the Wild.
No, I'm talking about Breath of the Wild specifically.
I'm just joking, but Labo.
The physics and the sandbox type nature of the game was their solution for that. It was the fact that, sure, you could watch somebody do something, but you might have done that differently, and if it's obvious to you that you could do it differently, that's going to have
some. You might want to try.
That's leaning into the situation. If you actually believe it to be a problem, which I don't believe it is a problem, it's free freaking marketing.
I know.
They're complaining about. If you believe it is a problem, then do something about it. Take advantage of it, leverage it, be creative. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much potential there. And the indie scene, we've seen an indie renaissance, I believe, because that lines up with streaming. That totally lines up with streaming.
Yeah.
And so these are people who know how to use it. They're part of the new guard. Amy Hennig's great, but she's part of the older way that things were done. And I'm sure it's upsetting to do things for a long time and then see it change and have to shift your expectations. But it's just like, are you a dinosaur or what? Like, you can sit here being like, back in my day, we had steel cars and we didn't wear seatbelts and we just smashed into each other. Like, you need to change. You need to adapt and deal with it. You know what I mean? You didn't have your kid back in the back of your car without a car seat. You know, it's just like stuff changes and it's going to keep changing. And it's going to keep moving that direction. It's only going to get worse if she thinks this is screwing over the industry. I don't believe that they'll ever go away. Like, what is she saying here? The Witcher 3 would have sold like twice as many copies if it weren't for streaming? No, I don't believe that. You know, not that she worked on The Witcher 3, but there's games
that would be a total BS claim, and that lines up with, that would be consistent with the position that she is saying. So if she is in this position, then it would be consistent for her to say, no, that game would have sold more copies had it been illegal to stream it or whatever. Yeah, and that is obviously just ridiculous.
Totally.
Because and another element to add to this is that, and this is true of any Let's Play you will ever watch and any that you ever see, the first 2 episodes will have this many views and then it will just decline.
It'll drop
from there. Yeah. People do not watch entire Let's Plays all the way through from the beginning, and very often at all. And the reason is because they're watching the beginning to see if they like the game, like I did with H.C. Bailey on Radiant Historia, and I said, this game's freaking sick. I have to buy it. Yeah. And then I went and bought the game because of his Let's Play. I would have never known about it otherwise.
That's happened to me with Golf Story. I watched Player Essence playing Golf Story, and I was like, I'm buying this game. I went and bought that game, like, right there. I stopped watching his Let's Play. I closed it. I was like, don't show me anymore. I've seen enough. And I bought that game. Now, Golf Story was cheap. It was like a $10 game. Like, that's maybe not. Maybe it's $15.
Impulse buy territory.
Exactly. It's not like a $60 game, which I think is, more what Amy was talking about here. But also, it's funny when you look at the indie game, because I think there's becoming, I think the real issue that the AAA games are having is that there's becoming a saturation of the video game space, right? Of the mind share, the market share. It's spread amongst a lot of different places now because the indie developers are allowed to function now, whereas it used to be really difficult to make and market a game and distribute a game as an indie developer. Now it's not. I mean, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's way easier than it was.
I didn't see a single ad for Stardew Valley during the Super Bowl.
No, me neither. He could though. He's made enough money. He could totally do a Super Bowl ad.
That'd be great.
But I look at it as more of like maybe an opportunity cost type of situation where it's like, oh, you could have bought the AAA game, but because streamers exist, you are aware of the indie games now. And your wallet, your money isn't going to that anymore. But it's not a bad thing. This is actually really good for consumers.
So it's a red ocean thing. They're competing for the same pie, not growing the pie per se.
Yeah, but because people only have so much to spend on video games in the first place. Yeah, and so much time to play video games. But it's like all of a sudden, you used to not be aware of games unless they bought an ad space in your magazine or unless they advertised on commercials and TV. You used to not know about games, and indies couldn't do that. But now you know about games. PewDiePie plays one game and its sales freaking skyrocket. At least that was back in the day. His views are down. But anyways, point being, it's more of like an opportunity cost thing, and that the AAA developers no longer have the chokehold on the market they used to. So it's not that streamers are streaming their game and people aren't buying it now. It's that streamers are streaming other games and marketing those games for them, and the indie developers are rising up, and there has to be a leveling out at some point because people have finite resources, finite time, finite amounts of money that they can spend on games. And it's a good thing because we have way wider selection of video games now than we used to. And it's only going to make the quality go up. It's only going to drive up quality, and the only way that the AAA devs can compete is if they make their costs go down. They need to become more efficient. And if they become more efficient, everyone wins.
Or do something unique that people
or be unique like Nintendo.
The Breath of the Wild example.
Yeah.
Like, you take advantage of that fact.
Totally.
I don't know. Make somebody watch a GIF of you launching yourself all the way across Hyrule and be like, holy crap, I want to try that.
See if that works.
In addition to this, you have to just be, I think, blind to the absolute like disgust for spoilers online.
Oh my gosh,
this position as well, because
yes.
I mean, constantly I am just berated with, I can't believe you said that. That's a spoiler. F you, like all the time for minor things that I would never, and most people would not even consider a spoiler. You know, something you see in the first 5 seconds of playing the game is a spoiler to someone. So in a culture that is just like ready to lash out at anyone who spoils a story for them, you really think those people are sitting there just like, nah, I'll just watch the whole thing on YouTube rather than playing the game? No, man, like, no. That's not the attitude of gamers in the majority at all. Most gamers want to check something out, see if it's something that they'll like so they can make an informed purchase.
Right.
That's what the purpose of streaming and Let's Plays serve. And another thing I wanted to add to my very first part of this, you know, what are they also controlling or even attempting to control for people who don't have the money to buy the game in the first place?
Exactly.
Little kids or whatever who they can't buy it. Their friends maybe don't have it. There's no other way for them to enjoy it other than to watch it. You're not losing anything there.
See, you can't look at a Let's Play that somebody made that gets 100,000 views per video and assume that that's 100,000 sales that you missed out on. That is terribly faulty thinking. Like the majority of those people were not going to buy your game to begin with, and possibly couldn't have bought your game even if they wanted to.
This is very, 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 very close at the heart of the piracy. There's some emulation stuff we'll be getting to. But it gets very close to the piracy discussion as well, where it's like, oh, look at all these sales we missed. All these people pirated and didn't buy the game.
Yeah, they would have bought it.
They would have bought it. They definitely would have bought the game.
I don't think they would. But so in some case, you've got to give them some allowance. Like, okay, you are missing out on some money because of this. Is it more than what you're making?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure some people.
No, I'm saying
like the point is
the total.
Exactly,
total.
Because you have to look at the aggregate. That's what I'm getting at. You've got to look at the whole picture. You can't just say, "Oh, we missed out on 10,000 sales." How many tens of thousands of sales did you get because of the free marketing?
That would
totally destroys it.
That would be like Andrew. This is a VFX joke.
Oh, yeah.
That would be like Andrew Kramer being like, "Crap, I could have monetized like all these tutorials and made so much freaking money, right? Or made it so you had to pay to watch them at all." But instead he made them free, and he had. Anyways, it's a whole. No, he wouldn't have. It's just
he sells all the presets and all the stuff he develops because of his attitude towards that sort of thing. It's the same attitude Gabe Newell has towards piracy.
Exactly.
Make a service that is more convenient than pirating the game, and people will freaking, because I'll pay $5 on a Steam sale any day over the freaking hassle of trying to pirate a game, which is really freaking annoying. And you get freaking a million Trojans by trying to do so with one of those shady websites. So I'll pay the $5 on the Steam sale and go over here. All of a sudden you have a new platform and a new service that is just like, wow, like that's way more convenient. I'm doing that before even the thought of piracy. That's the only way to combat it.
Yeah.
So anyways.
And that's what I'm saying. Game companies need to become efficient. Like that's how you battle stuff like this. Become more efficient because the overhead's just unbelievable.
Well, because just real quick, Anthem just got delayed for like a whole nother year.
A year?
Crap. A whole nother year.
Holy crap.
That's a lot I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's like, I don't know if there are problems over there or what. The game. But EA's putting a lot of eggs into that basket. These companies, they're putting a lot of eggs into fewer projects, right? Like they're spreading out. You look at Rockstar, they used to have a new game every year. Then they had GTA 5 and nothing has come out in all the years since GTA 5 came out. And so we're going to see less stuff spaced out farther. So those individual things have to like freaking blow up to make this all worth it still. And it's their own decision, like as a business model.
Right.
Their own
it's
choice.
A risky
so
choice.
If it doesn't pay off because it's risky, then there is nobody to blame but themselves.
You know what's funny? That was how we ran our YouTube channel. But our VFX YouTube channel, Dark Pixel, the one that got us started on this whole thing, we would have one big video that we spent, months and months working on. And if that video didn't blow up, we had a lot of costs to recuperate some other way.
Yeah.
Right. Not most of our videos didn't go viral. A lot of them did, which was great. But when we started counting on videos to go viral, and when maybe one or two of them didn't go viral like we thought, all of a sudden we had just spent 6 months working on something, and our returns on it were basically nothing. Mm-hmm. So our YouTube, we fell into that exact same trap at one point.
High risk, high reward.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Good question. Thank you so much, Chris. Or no, that wasn't Chris. That was freaking Velhart. Chris is the next guy.
Oh, we got to go through these a little bit quicker now.
Chris Gewen, how would you rank the various Final Fantasy's equipment systems? Do you prefer the games like FF4, where you constantly building a character by filling lots of armor slots, and the upgrades are generally straightforward and obvious, or later games where you have fewer slots, more strategic trade-offs in your choices, or maybe FF8, where it's not there? Did you ever resent later titles for restricting armor choices to one bangle and maybe an accessory? Okay. This will be a real quick answer for me. So I am all about the Final Fantasy IX equipment system. I love FF9's equipment system for a number of reasons, but primarily because the equipment is useful for the entire game. And that's because elemental affinities, or elemental nullification, I should say, comes in very handy in a lot of instances. So even though you got this armor at the beginning of the game, it gives 50% fire nullification or whatever. So using that early game piece of equipment on a fire boss late in the game is still valuable because the fire reduction is more important than the physical defense for that particular fight. So that was really great about FF9, but also you learn your abilities from the equipment. So you put the equipment on, you gain experience while wearing the equipment, and then you earn abilities from that equipment that are inherent in that piece of equipment. So you'll gain characters later in the game that don't have some of those abilities. You can still equip them with that early game armor, and they'll learn those abilities that they need to have to catch up with the rest of the party. So there was a strategic element to it, and all of the equipment across the board was useful in some way throughout the game. So it's not just like the traditional format of RPGs where next town you go to, you upgrade all your equipment and you forget all the stuff you had before. You get the new level, the new spells. You forget all the spells you used to use before because they're useless now, and you just move forward with the new stuff. FF13, which is something I talk about a bit in the review that I'm constructing right now, does a really good job with its abilities. The abilities are useful all the way through the game. Even the first level cure spell has advantages over the second level cure rust spell in certain instances. So you're still using cure way late into the game, even though you have the level 2 cure spell. So I like games that do that don't nullify the importance of early game abilities and equipment by giving you better stuff constantly. So I really, really like Final Fantasy IX for that reason. But I do agree that in games like Final Fantasy VII, let's say as a direct comparison to FF6, you have 3 pieces of equipment per character versus like the 5 or 6 on each character in FF6. And there was a lot more strategy in the equipment setups in FF6 than there were in FF7. And I know that this isn't universally true, but for the most part in FF7, it was kind of that way. You go to the next town, you get the next best equipment, and you forget the rest from before. Now, there will be some that have double materia growth or triple materia growth. That
I think that's where Final Fantasy 7 and 8 kind of focused. Instead of having super customizable, armor slots and all of that kind of stuff, and you can buy in different things that have different affinities, it was more like the materia. That was the complex thing that they wanted people to focus on, right? So don't worry much about the armor. You can make yourself stronger with the materia.
That's true.
Depending on how you mix and match all those.
And the materia system is freaking fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
So it makes up for it. But I do really like FF6 and FF9 because there's so many different pieces of equipment and there's so many strategic ways to disperse them among the party and use them. And,
you can mix and match your favorites.
Yeah. and you mix and match them so that you have, you nullify this kind of elemental damage, but you also have like a boost to your strength when you level up because this one's on or whatever. I think that's more of a magicite thing that I think about it, but you get the point. Like you mix it around for like almost constantly to play optimally, and I really like it when games do that.
Yeah, I agree. FF9, my favorite.
9 is the best.
It makes it
I'll
enjoyable.
defend 7 and 8, but 9 is the best.
It makes it enjoyable. Like it's fun to make those decisions, and when an inventory management system can be fun, then you've done a good job. Because it usually is not fun.
Well, and you can also like weld your weapons together and get like a double-sided sword, which that was really cool. It's not just the armor selection, but you can upgrade stuff, and you go to the Mughals or something, and they'll like totally do a number on your weapons.
You can take the materials and you can craft a weapon versus just buying the new weapon. Because you could just buy the new weapon town to town and progress that way, or you could take the weapons you've got, like combine them together into something unique. And FF9 by far, in my opinion, has the best equipment system in the entire series.
We're all in agreement.
Okay. Hat89 wants to know about emulators. There are positive and negative sides to emulating games, and I am certainly guilty of emulating games as opposed to buying them in the past, but I still feel like I've been exposed to many games that I would have never been interested in the first place without emulation. For instance, I bought the DS version of Chrono Trigger. I never owned the original. I emulated it. I would imagine that many people that will buy the Secret of Mana remake never actually owned a legit copy, but emulated the game. Then there's the fact that emulation has allowed for games to be preserved for historical purposes that may have disappeared otherwise. However, it is undeniable that people will emulate games instead of buying them. I have been guilty of this. Do you all have any thoughts on the impact of emulation, good or bad? And he says, clearly I'm not talking about Sony emulating PS1 games on the PS2.
Right, it's the PC emulators,
Yeah, okay. So, I guess just my real quick thoughts on this are... you bring up good points about being able to preserve games, because a lot of these companies have not bothered to do that over the years. Have lost data that is otherwise preserved because of people who are invested in keeping this stuff stored on their servers or whatever throughout wherever they live, in Sweden or wherever.
Where piracy is legal.
But I think that one thing that really needs to be part of this discussion is the fact that the burden of that, companies they still own it. They still have the choice of whether or not they want to preserve something, or whether or not something should be preserved, and whether or not something should be available to you today. So we gripe all the time about Nintendo not getting on the ball with the Virtual Console on the Switch, or not having a lot of games available on it right away, even their own games or whatever that are not third party, that would not require the licensing garbage you have to go through. Crisis Core, for instance. The reason we don't have an HD version of Crisis Core is because Gact was a voice actor and did music for that game. Licensing, you got to pay that guy money if you're going to do another release of it, and I'm sure that that's not cheap. So, in a lot of circumstances like that, they'll just forgo it entirely. They'll just say, whatever, we're not going to bother with that, because it would cost too much money to try and make that available on PS3 or whatever it is, or PS4. So, or PS Vita or whatever. So, aside from that, we're just looking at first party. We own this thing. There are no issues with licensing. Even still, I don't put up all of my own games immediately upon releasing the Virtual Console or whatever. That's a very frustrating thing. However, they still are completely within their legal rights to do that. They own it, and therefore whether or not it's available is totally in their hands, and it's not my... I have no say in whether or not it should or shouldn't be available, and whether or not I should have it when I want it. So for that reason, emulation is very tricky. And you're talking about, it's nice that we could preserve this thing for historical purposes, but it's not your legal right to do so. It's the IP owner's legal right, whether they choose to do that or not. So that's the trouble I have with emulating games, especially ones that I don't own already. So for that, I mean, not to say that I haven't been a bit hypocritical on that front, because I played Seiken Densetsu 3, which was never made available in the West.
That's the only way you can play it.
I played Terranigma, which was never made available in North America.
Do you regret either of those?
No, I don't. I'm glad I played them. But
me too. Life-changing games.
It's still legally a very tricky thing to justify, because it doesn't matter that, I just never had a chance. They never gave me a chance. I got to play it somehow. That seems almost intuitively like justifiable, but it really isn't. So for that reason, when talking about emulation, it's like, just dude, rip your own ISO,
which is hard, by the way.
It's not easy, but if you're really interested, because emulators are totally legal. You can download an emulator for free. There's no issue there. It's just the games themselves. As long as you own the game, learn how to rip your own ISO, or the incredibly prohibitive cost of getting your own ROM file out of your own cart is just, I think, the moral route. So that's my thought on that.
Yes. So, what do you want to say?
Well, I was going to say that, like, the retro video game boom that has happened within the last 10-ish years, maybe 7 or 8 years, has cranked the price on a lot of 90s era video games, even good 80s era video games. If you want an original copy, if you want an original cart of if you want an original Chrono Trigger, you're going to be paying a lot more money for that. And I see right now people moving towards emulation in the sense that like they're less willing to pay $100, $150, $200 sometimes for a rare, for a cart, even if they have the resources, like they have a Super Nintendo to play it on or whatever. I feel like the pressure, like back when we were emulating stuff, it was like, dude, it was like, first off, like none of us had disposable income. Like we were like the kids basically, that wouldn't have been able to buy this crap anyway.
We would have watched Let's Plays back in the day because we didn't have money.
Would have done.
And so I remember, emulating Sega Densetsu 3 and Chrono Trigger and Earthbound and games that you heard about, but at that point we're talking like 1999, right?
Yeah, this was 20 years ago.
It was even at that point, it was a lot of stuff was out of print. It was hard to get your hands on, and for us then, but if you could find it, it wasn't that expensive. We just freaking were kids. Like we just
kids didn't have any money.
We didn't have any money, but we were, and kind of how you hear about 14-year-olds programming viruses taking down like the CIA, like. We were like the kids that were online, like figuring out there's got to be a way to find this thing, man. I want to play this.
Right.
But we just didn't have disposable income. My first experience playing Chrono Trigger was an emulated version of Chrono Trigger, and it was absolutely 100% a subpar experience. I was playing on keyboard, and the alpha channels weren't working properly with some effects. Oh,
so the shadows.
And so you'd have to pause the game and go up and mess it in some menus, and we were using ZSNES.
Yeah, which by the way, they don't like. That's old.
Yeah, that's old news now.
I thought they'd keep it up to date, but I don't think they have.
But and that was how I played Final Fantasy VI as well. And it was like, and I started playing Final Fantasy V, a fan translated version.
Yeah,
at that point in time. It's just, I don't know. It's funny to look back on because I do not regret having played any of those games personally. I don't. I mean, it got me way.
They kind of shaped our childhood in a lot of ways.
They did, and like you mentioned here, like I bought the DS version of Chrono Trigger. Like
me too.
It's funny. So I wouldn't try to justify it legally and say like, no, I was in my legal right to do what I did because I freaking wasn't. But I was also pirating music on Napster at the same point in time, and it was freaking crazy back then, dude. You couldn't just stream stuff, man.
I know YouTube didn't exist. Spotify, we downloaded all the things you have nowadays.
Do you remember?
Just weren't a thing then.
Remember when the Two Towers trailer came out?
Oh my gosh,
we waited all freaking day.
Oh my gosh,
to download that trailer.
And hope that your mom didn't pick up the phone while you were like at school.
Right, because if the internet gets disconnected, like the whole file gets corrupted and it's useless.
Oh man, it's such a different thing now. It's like, oh geez, and
the world was way different.
It was pretty different, and
it wasn't that long ago.
And some solutions have come about for some of those things, like the music piracy thing's been pretty easily addressed by streaming.
Yeah,
like
Spotify.
Talking about Gabe Newell's thing, it's like it's way easier to stream a song than Like I will pay for whatever streaming service and just listen to and not have to keep it on my phone or whatever.
Yeah, that's actually worth a lot.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So on that end of things, like the music industry's done a better job than like the gaming industry has at addressing these types of issues. Like you can stream Beatles music. At least I'm pretty sure you can now. They're usually the last. They're usually the last ones to hop on.
Yeah, Rolling Stones and then the Beatles.
AC/DC.
Yeah,
Metallica.
they held out.
Some holdouts, but otherwise you can go back and I can freaking play some old like Muddy Waters, you know, like I can stream it. I can freaking stream Muddy Waters, but I can't just like hop on my computer and play legally Mario Brothers on the SNES or on the NES.
I know that makes. I brought this up when we recorded before too, but I see no reason why Nintendo doesn't have a browser-based emulation on their website, and you.
Totally.
Become a subscriber for $2.99 a month or whatever it is, and you just go freaking play any freaking NES or Super NES freaking.
Well,
Mario
I do know
why.
This is actually one of my points I was going to bring up. Is the SNES Mini. So when I first read this question, I was like, "Hey, what have the impacts, positive or negative, been on the gaming industry from emulating games?" My personal opinion is that it's almost all positive. Almost all of the effects on the gaming industry today are that emulators have kind of affected to the industry as a whole has been positive. People are familiar with older games now who didn't grow up then. People have access to things they couldn't have played before, kind of like a library. We talked about this last week, Mike. There was like a library where libraries don't cost money. You just need a card. I mean, I guess you pay taxes and that helps a little bit. Yeah. But you just need a card and you go in there and you can do anything. Like all the books, they have movies, they have music. Yeah. It's like if they had an online library where you just need a little membership card and you've got the library of games and you can just play them at any point. And it's of no additional cost to you. And they're all old. They're all like public domain at this point. I mean, the games aren't, but I'm speaking generally to maybe what they should be, right?
Public domain. The Mickey Mouse rules.
I know it'll never happen. But when something's so old that it's out of production, it will never be printed again. Yeah. You know, it's like, okay, libraries should have this. These need to be accessible somehow, right?
Historically, that's what would have happened.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. That's what's always happened up until this point in history where things are freaking backwards.
If you wanted to read some Mark Twain, you would go to the library.
Go to the library.
Like he would still be.
It's not like the Mark Twain Holdings Company gets to decide when his book will be re-released and republished again. It's like, no, the library has a copy. You can go read it.
Books can recirculate in the interface. There's one platform. There's essentially one platform for books, and it's like real life, right?
Exactly.
It's like you don't have to plug it.
Amazon is changing that, but still.
Like you can open it and just read it if you know the language. But like video games are isolated on these islands. They're on these platforms. You know, and it's not like my music comparison breaks down there because it's not like you could, if you want to listen to the Beatles, you had to buy a Beatlematic back in like 1970 or whatever that would only play Beatles songs.
Right.
You had your record player.
Right.
Everyone else was making records. It was standardized. Right.
Right.
They benefited from that. Video games, there's
no standard. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. But to take my claim a little further, that emulation has had almost entirely positive effects on gaming. Emulators don't encroach onto the modern imprint games very well. I have a very good graphics card on my computer, and I have trouble like emulating a PS3 game. Right, doesn't. It's not optimized. It doesn't work. I have a GTX 1080. Right, I should be able to play a PS3 game.
In theory, yeah, definitely.
I can't.
It doesn't work that cryptocurrency too. You gotta like turn that off.
I've got my Bitcoin mine, but it's like 15 years ago and before is basically the emulatable period of time. It does not encroach on modern games. And when you look at the SNES Mini, this is my case study that I did in my head real quick. If emulation is, these games are all available for free, the negative impact should be, these game companies that, as you stated, Mike, legally should be capable of putting these games out at their own discretion and making them accessible and selling them for profit because they own it and they legally should be able to do that. Then if there was a negative impact to that because of emulation, I would have to look at that and say, okay, this shouldn't be happening. But when Nintendo decided to release the NES Mini and the SNES Mini, they freaking are flying off shelves. All of those games are available for free. Go get an emulator and find the ROMs that are all available for free. Everyone knows it. They're there. For some reason, people are still buying the SNES Mini and the NES Mini. And I think emulators have actually helped that. Because people see some of those games and they think, oh my gosh, I'm actually familiar with some of these games. These are the classics. I'm willing to spend money on this now. As opposed to, I don't think this would have flown were emulators not a thing. People wouldn't even know what to expect from these games.
Not only are those machines selling like hotcakes, they're selling well beyond the expectations of Nintendo.
So far beyond.
Possibly because of emulation.
Exactly. I think it's actually helped these companies.
Well, no one's going to buy this. We just need something for holiday sales, but everyone just plays the game for free on emulators anyways. Let's just see what happens, and then they can't even keep up with production.
And that's the disconnect. That's the assumption that these old companies are making, that they need to get out of their minds, that just because people are watching a YouTube stream, just because people are emulating an old game on their computers, does not mean they aren't going to buy your game. Like, just get that idea out of your head.
Yep.
It's not how it actually works, and we have some evidence to show for that now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You see, there's a lot of people that are like, why would I buy one of these? I have a Raspberry Pi, and I made it into a thing that
they don't get it.
Everything ever.
They don't get it.
But it's like part of the history of video games is the controller, right?
Totally, you gotta play it on that controller.
It's one of my regrets with the first time I played Chrono Trigger and Seiken Densetsu 3.
I know, on the keyboard, it's the WASD.
Oh, like getting like like a RSI because your hand's like sideways.
Oh my gosh!
And you're trying to, It's just
because you can play Seiken and Densetsu 2 player, right? So we would sit next to each other. We'd cram on the keyboard, and one person had the numpad and the arrow keys. The other person had WASD and like the space bar.
Something else.
Because it was just it was uncomfortable.
Well, because SNES is the first, like you can do that on NES, whatever. There's like two buttons in the D-pad.
Yeah, that's no
starts like, but there's shoulder buttons. They're assuming you can do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
All right.
Good question, Hat.
Pretty well.
Let's move on here. Square Hard. During the last Nintendo Direct, it was announced that Super Mario Odyssey was getting a free DLC called Luigi's Balloon World. While I'm not particularly interested in that, it did get me thinking about what other potential Odyssey DLC Nintendo might have in the works. What kind of DLC would you like to see? Personally, I'd like to see them expand content for the Ruined and Cloud Kingdoms, since those were visually two of my favorites but had the least amount of stuff to do. Maybe go back in time and take part of the Battle of Crumbledon. Seems like there is some backstory there to be explored. I agree with you. I'm not keen on the Luigi's Balloon World thing. And
you've seen the video.
Here's the thing, is that Mario Odyssey is already so packed with, I don't know how many moons, 850 moons or something.
Oh, I think more than that.
So there's a lot of moons. I've gotten like 300 of them. And so I have much more left.
Yeah, I think I've run 300 too.
That I probably will not do.
No. So it's like if the DLC is more moons, it's like I haven't even gotten the ones that are there. Yeah, I don't know if that's...
I'm kind of at a place right now where it's like any additional content for Mario Odyssey for me is might as well not exist, because I'm probably not even going to get to the content that's already in the game.
That means the game was too finished. You got a too finished game. The game should have come out before that.
Nintendo should take notes, man.
Take notes.
They should have cut at least half of those moons out.
I know.
And release them as DLC later.
Now I'm not going to play that. Half the game now.
There's something, but I don't think that I'm in the majority there. I think that I have this very weird personal thing where if I don't have even as basic a narrative as Mario is, a narrative reason to go to the next world and do the next thing, I kind of just stop caring. So you kind of get to the ending of the game, quote unquote,
right?
With Bowser and everything like that, right? And then it's like, oh, but there's more levels now.
I don't think Landon's played it yet.
No, I knew that much because pretty much every
that's obvious.
But no, I still played.
Me and Mike have beaten it though.
Well, people will be pissed at me already, and this is kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. It's like they did not want to know that.
I figure
they're not going to watch my Let's Play
of Mario.
Yeah, that's always a given, though. You beat the game, and it's
there's additional content after you finish the Bowser final boss or whatever. So I'm there, and I'm thinking initially, awesome. new world. I'm done. It's like to stop caring.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing, because I love post game content. I'm all about post game content in theory, in my head. I'm like, oh, after I beat Ocarina of Time, I want to go around and talk to all the people and see the world in its beaten state. But in practice, maybe I don't actually want to do that. I think once the story's over, I don't really care to do anything more in the game, you know?
Yeah. That being said, I actually would really be into a DLC where you play through the levels as Peach, because spoilers, she kind of goes off at the end of Mario Odyssey and decides that she's going to kind of like go on her own trip around the world. And you go to the different levels and you see her there and you talk to her and she's talking about what she's doing, and she's kind of on her way around, exploring. It'd be cool if they released kind of like they did with Super Mario Brothers, or New Super Mario Brothers Wii U, where they released the Luigi versions of the levels. Where
that was cool, different. Actually. That was cool. Peach. Peach. That's right.
If they did something similar where the levels were redesigned for Peach's unique abilities and challenges were made specifically built around her and her mechanics or something like that, and you kind of followed her trip around the world, and played as her. I think that could be a really cool DLC. I'd be into that. So that's one thing that I would suggest.
Nice.
I don't have really suggestions except, Ruined Kingdom would be pretty sick to see an actual level made out of that. But there's so much to do in that game. Like I said, I'm not wanting for any DLC at this point.
Yep. All right, let's move on to our last one, Chocolate Rob. With the PS4 release of Shadow of the Colossus out soon, I'm wondering about ambiguous storytelling. I never really saw Dorman as being an evil character, yet many players would claim that he, she, it is. The game is quite deliciously vague on the morality of the events in the story. The same can easily be said about Delita's ruthlessness in Final Fantasy Tactics. Ovelia's assessment of him took a serious downturn when she overheard him murder Valmafra. Yet when that character, Valmafra, turns up alive at the end, we see that he was not as ruthless as he appeared. How evil, ruthless do these characters seem to you? How do you feel about this kind of moral ambiguity in storytelling? Do you have any other good examples? Okay. So, man, we had so many good points about this.
We did, and I'm never going to be able to do it justice.
Let's try to remember at least a portion of them.
Yeah.
So let's start with games that have a very different, I think, intent from the get-go. Like if we're like comparing, let's say, Shadow of the Colossus and its style of storytelling to even Final Fantasy Tactics, there's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, it's a pretty big gap,
right? So if, say, Final Fantasy Tactics was as vague in its plot as Shadow of the Colossus was, then we would have different feelings about it, I would feel.
Probably.
So the reason why I feel... Well, I guess I'll just start with this. Generally speaking, I really like games that put, or just stories in general, TV shows, movies, novels, whatever it is, where they put out philosophical questions and don't attempt to answer them. The author does not attempt to say this is right or whatever. Rather, they present it, and they present this character's view on that and this character's view on that in interesting ways. They explore that deeply, and then the reader, the viewer, is meant to sort of decide where they fall. I really like stories that do that. You could call that a form of moral ambiguity, and I find that I appreciate that most when you incorporate that into character development. So Final Fantasy Tactics is a great example of that, because Delita's response to the problem happening in the kingdom is very different from Ramza's. And I think while it's not necessarily like completely gray the way that they present Ramza as the hero versus Delita. They obviously make Delita more out to be a villain in the story. There is still enough of it to where there are some players who will play it and go, I kind of understand where Delita's coming from. I don't necessarily think he is evil. And I really like that. So I really appreciate that in stories like that, where maybe the vagueness or the ambiguity you're speaking of comes from, well, is the answer to this controversial issue fully defined by the author or not? I would rather that it's not. But when we're talking to plot points, understanding how we got from A, B, C, all the way down to Z, and I don't know, I'm missing 20 letters of the alphabet there, and I have no freaking clue what's happening. Right. That I do not like.
Yeah, that's bad. So you don't want to be ambiguous on the plot. You gotta you can be ambiguous in motivations and morals, but not the plot.
Sure, and you know, symbolism, and you can play through something again, or read an ancillary work and go, oh, wait a second, I'd never considered that before. That changes the context of this particular scene or something, and it makes it deeper. That's great. I get more enjoyment out of a second viewing of that. That's awesome. I don't want to have to see it 3 or 4 times to even understand what in the freaking world is going on. So now there is an exception to this, and I believe Shadow of the Colossus falls in line with that, where Shadow of the Colossus is not setting out. The intent of that game is not to tell its plot. Its plot is not the point. Right. The point of it is to make you think about something that only I think a video game can do, because you go into a video game with certain expectations. There will be bosses and monsters. I'm going to hunt those monsters and kill them and slay them, and it's going to be freaking epic and awesome. And you do that for 2 or 3 of them, and you're going, this is great, but you start to see that this is taking a toll on this character. And then you start to see the faces of the colossi, and you start thinking about the world, and you go, is this right? Is this right what I'm doing? That's something that I feel like only a video game can really get across in the same way that Shadow of the Colossus does. Because you're participating.
I haven't seen it done nearly as well since Shadow of the Colossus.
And it's the point of Shadow of the Colossus is the theme going on there. It's not what happens A, B to C. Right. And that stuff is left vague. You don't know who Dorman is. You don't know what the tribe that Wander comes from, or necessarily exactly what happened, how this particular land became like a taboo to visit or whatever. You don't really know the answers to those things, and it's fine because it doesn't matter. What matters is what I'm doing as the player, is what Wander is doing for the sake of saving someone he loves, morally a correct thing to do. Is this right? Do you feel something when you start on the 7th Colossus? Right. You're killing these things that did nothing to you, that are not harming anyone, and that have, as Kason pointed out when we recorded last week, these faces that are very benign, round eyes, like you were saying, right? Make that point again, because I thought that was
their eyes
cool.
are round, so they almost look scared. Like whenever you get to look at the Colossi close up, they don't have the evil slant eyes that typically an enemy boss will have. Mm-hmm. They don't even have normal shaped eyes. They have perfectly round eyes. And that indicates either fear or surprise or just nothing, just blankness. Like they don't have, but their intent. Humans perceive intent by looking at other people's eyes. And when you look at the eyes of this thing and you assume it's your enemy, but it's not showing the signs that an enemy would show, having round eyes, like it becomes a little bit unsettling when you kill it, especially because it's just sitting there looking at you, basically.
And you know what's so interesting about that is that you can climb the Colossus, you can mess around in the area, its eyes are blue. It's only when you start attacking it
that they turn yellow,
that its eyes turn, I think, red.
Is it red?
Yeah. So, but still, I think that's a really great point with the round eyes thing. And it really does add to the, I guess, the unsettling nature
the questionable
of what you're doing. Like, is because I think that almost anyone who's played the game can attest. You get to that first Colossus and it's huge, and it's rattling the ground with every step, and you're going like, how am I going to take that thing down? You're just so concerned about whether or not you can that you don't stop to think whether or not you should.
Exactly.
Right? And at some point over the course of 16 encounters with these beings, you start to question whether or not you should. And that's the point of Shadow of the Colossus, in my opinion, and which is why its ambiguity is so delicious, as you have described here, because that adds to the question. I don't know the context. Are these things really evil? Why did my people not want me to come here? Who is this Dorman guy? What are his intentions? Is it a guy, girl? What's going? All those things lead into you questioning, but having no choice about what you have to do next. And so, like, I just think that is one of many reasons why it is an absolute masterpiece of a game that really shows how video games are different as an art form from anything else. And then just to make my final point on this, this is not to say, talking about me wanting to have clear exposition and plot, that I want everything spoon-fed to me, right? People will often try and say that, well, you just want everything spoon-fed to you. You just, you're just dumb and you don't want to have to think about things. I obviously I do.
Right.
But let's just put it on a scale, right? Let's put it on a sliding scale. Let's say on this side is people who want things spoon-fed, and over here are people who don't want answers to anything, and they want to theory craft like crazy, right? They want to be able to sort of like think about the game, talk about the game, discuss, come up with what they think is the best explanation for why something has happened. I am not that kind of person. I don't want to write the story for the author or the artist. Yeah. I want them to come up with a story and deliver it to me and to learn from their point of view on something. I don't want to do the work to make it up and make it make sense.
Well, you don't want to have to read the Ultimania to know what happened in the game you just played.
Yes, I don't. Some people do. And that's perfectly acceptable. If you're that person, that's great, and there's stuff out there for you. What I'm saying is if that's the spectrum, we're on this side or this side, I fall not right in the middle, but a little bit over here. Yeah. I like clear exposition. I like the author to deliver a clear story to me. I don't want to have to think of the reasons why it makes sense myself. But I do want to be able to chew on philosophy that makes me question my own beliefs, that makes me think about things twice and think about maybe I'm not right about this. Maybe there is another way of looking at it and getting new perspective on things. So that's the kind of ambiguity and vagueness I like in storytelling personally.
Yeah. For me, moral ambiguity I actually find very difficult in video games. Because it makes me want to stop playing. Like in Shadow of the Colossus specifically, you go in. I didn't know what to expect, but I think you showed it to me the first time, Mike, and you were just like, "This is a sweet game. You got to see it." And I was like, "Sweet." We stayed up all night, played the game. It was wonderful. But this was 12, 13 years ago. But I remember thinking, okay, this is a sweet game. Like I have in my mind what a sweet game is and what it ought to be. And we start playing the game and it's like, okay, there's some crazy voice. There's this girl we're going to try and help out. All right, we got to go start killing these colossi. And after you kill the colossi, then all of a sudden this black thing goes into you. And as opposed to being rewarded, as opposed to working on a reward system where you beat the boss and you get something, in this game, you beat the boss and you begin to lose your life. Your humanity, your appearance begins to look less appealing, I think, as the game progresses. And maybe you don't realize it till a little bit later, but where the story is going is not clear. Who is good or bad is not clear. And to be honest, we'll see the game through to the end, but I did not actually have a huge desire to continue playing that game, despite how cool the Guardians were, because of the moral ambiguity, because it made me, I didn't feel like I was progressing. I didn't feel like I was doing what I ought to be doing in a video game. Now, this is very strange. I don't know exactly why. I think it's probably just fear of the unknown. When things are different or unknown, most people just kind of tend to respond in a somewhat fear. And I use fear loosely, but like how you're afraid of the dark because you don't know what's there. not knowing something elicits a response of like kind of being afraid of it. And so that's kind of how I am towards video games, but I'm not that way towards any other medium. If it comes to movies, books, TV shows, or I guess plays, I don't really watch many plays or operas or anything, or music. I like moral ambiguity across the board. Not as much in video games. And I think it's because I'm doing it. When it's the video game and I'm controlling the character, the moral ambiguity takes on a whole different meaning when I'm the one perpetrating the supposedly amoral acts, when I can't be the character in that instance. I want to play a game where I can kind of, be the character to some extent, or like role-playing games do a really good job at immersing me into a new world and as a new character. I can't do that in morally ambiguous stories because that's not me for the most part. But like, it's just so uncomfortable. We worked through this last podcast, and I can't remember what the conclusion was essentially, but I like it everywhere else, just not in games.
Well, because in other mediums, you're observing someone else make those choices.
So, for instance,
there's not a consequence for you necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. I brought up Fyodor Dostoevsky. He's one of my favorite, like philosopher authors, and I've like when it comes to either like The Underground Man or The Crime and Punishment, like when his characters behave in an amoral manner and they feel like they are morally above everyone else and that they can kind of do things. It's kind of like him writing out like moral. What would it be? It's like Dostoevsky's response to Nietzsche's philosophy, which is the big philosophy at the time, and he was carrying it to its logical extreme, right? And what happens if people do kind of abandon morals, and how does society then function? And it turns out not so good. But you're watching that unfold through somebody else's eyes. Like with The Underground Man, you're just in the tormented soul who is just like longing to express himself but can't, and keeps it all bottled in. And then with Crime and Punishment, you're with this guy who's committed a terrible crime and is having to live with it, and he's essentially punishing himself. And you don't need society to punish him, he'll do it himself. I freaking love that, right? But if if Crime and Punishment was a game and I'm controlling the guy, I'm not playing that game. I'm putting it down, and it's not going to happen. Like I can't do it. But even for TV shows, like I think I brought up Death Note, how it's like just the simple philosophical like question of, hey, what if you take a good person, a straight A student, a young, seemingly promising, incorruptible, popular, smart person, and you drop into his lap the means to anonymously kill people. And like, what happens? And they just kind of, and it makes sense. I mean, not everything in the show is, of course, reasonable, but at least the underlying premise is like, this person will have a breaking point, and they will start to wield that power. And basically across the board, anybody would eventually do that, because that's just the philosophy they're trying to explore, and the character motivations. It's cool, but not when you're the character and you're the one doing it. I think I've made my point. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that we got onto that topic last time because I think I had mentioned something along the lines of, in recent years I've stopped playing games and watching movies for entertainment. Rather, I'm looking for something to challenge me.
Right,
I'm looking for something to make me think about things on a deeper level, and that's why I tend to stick more to games with deeper narrative and less to something that's just fun to play. And then you were talking about how you do that with reading, but you're not so much interested in doing that when it comes to games.
Yeah, so, I don't know exactly why, other than the fact that I'm controlling it, but I would love for games to get to a point where I could do that. I want to experience that type of, that resonant of a story in a video game. It's hard for me.
Yeah. I think that like books already, it's easier to be like, I'm learning something from this experience, or this is something
because it's a book you read and you're learning.
Exactly. I think there's different expectations sometimes when you're playing a video game. And,
absolutely.
And that can color your impression a little bit. Like, I don't know. I enjoy moral ambiguity in movies a lot. I feel like a lot of but it's not so much like I don't know, like what you were talking about, just general ambiguity, plot ambiguity, like the Shadow of the Colossus. is works really well in stuff that's like character driven or like a character study. I think that stuff's really interesting, so that you can just, you know what, we're not making judgments here. We're just seeing what this guy did,
right,
or this woman did, and then we're, you know,
it's
and
almost like a No Country for Old Men.
I was thinking of that, and the movies that we always bring up.
I know, man. I'm sorry.
There Will Be Blood does a good job of that, because there's no judgment in There Will Be Blood. I mean, obviously you're gonna watch that and be like, what the crap, dude?
Right.
Like, but it's
you assume he went to jail, but that's not the point.
You know, yeah, exactly. It's like nobody like the guy you thought was gonna quote unquote win isn't the one who quote unquote wins, but there's really no winning here.
Right.
I like stuff like that. That's really fun, I think, in film. I like Shadow Colossus that does a great job. I think the only other games that I've played that are coming to mind that approach this even are like Bioshock Infinite.
Okay, sure.
And they're not the same kind of thing. But that's
right.
I would love to get you guys' opinions on Hellblade.
I would love to play that, actually.
It's cheap. It's available on Steam, and it is fantastic.
Real low cheap.
In these terms, when we're talking about ambiguity and storytelling and character-driven stuff, I think it's just wonderful in these regards.
One that came to my mind earlier was The Last Guardian, but that was made by the same Fumito Ueda, the same guy, right? But lots of ambiguity there too. Mm-hmm. But I like it in Last Guardian because you're not participating in the moral ambiguity. You're legitimately doing what you would hope you would do were you in that situation. With Shadow of the Colossus, you have no choice but to continue killing these things, even if you have decided for yourself you shouldn't. That's how the game is. You're going to play it, or you're just going to put it down.
Yeah. So I read something pretty funny the other day. They're talking about, to make this a hilarious discussion, but
can't wait.
Contrasting Shadow of the Colossus with Monster Hunter, given that they're
yes, I think it's a great point.
Shadow of the Colossus, it's like, oh my gosh, I killed this
beautiful
this thing.
And Monster Hunter, you cannot wait to slay as
and
many.
Monster Hunter's like, I killed freaking 10 of these and I made a hat out of them, and I need to make some boots now. You know, it's freaking Monster Hunter's more in the vein of what you would normally expect from a game.
Totally.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm going to get together with my friends and we're going to freaking have a good time. And there's no moral consequence to this. It's just a good time. Versus, holy crap, what am I doing here?
Yeah, and it's always like the quests are always like, oh, this Raytheon is like bothering these farmers or whatever, you know, and it's like, okay, gotta go kill it. You know?
That is the only solution.
Just because the farmers are. Yeah, so it's video games definitely run a wide gamut there, and there's more of the Monster Hunter.
Sure.
The names of the show.
Well, it's just so much safer, and I think it's true of film nowadays too. There's more of the Marvel comic type movie where millions of people are dying all the time.
I know, it's freaking crazy.
But there's you don't think about that, right? That doesn't matter. Yeah. It's fun versus something that's more Oscar worthy, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Something that's actually, can be classified as art.
Yeah.
So it's easy. It's not only easier, it's just safer. Like more people are looking for that.
Yeah.
They're looking for, and more people look for entertainment than they do for art.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just that there's more need, there's more demand for entertainment.
I feel like oftentimes what I probably enjoy more than strictly moral ambiguity and things is something along the lines of like how Chris Nolan's like The Dark Knight works, where you have very, very contrasting moral perspectives that are being represented by characters that very strongly believe in their perspectives, and you maybe do have one that wins in the end, but it makes you wonder if maybe that should have happened, or if that was the best thing, or why it even happened. And I enjoyed that kind of thing as well. It's not like full on, flat out, what there is no right and wrong. It's almost more like
what you thought was right, maybe
what you thought, or for example, like the Joker says a lot of stuff that's like, oh yeah, he's right about a lot of stuff. And I like that in a villain, I guess I should say. So even when it is a little more, that's not Marvel-y per se, but even when it's still like in the superhero genre, that's typically more simplifying stuff like that, you can still explore this stuff in a satisfying way, I think.
Absolutely. And which is why I think The Dark Knight in particular is I mean, far and away, right? The highest rated superhero film
It's
out
the
there.
best one.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So
It's closely followed by
one,
Guardians of the Galaxy.
It's one that takes, which is not.
That's probably true. That's probably true.
Probably.
Oh, jeez.
It takes that simple, fun. Well, Batman's never been a fun storyline necessarily, but the idea
in some iterations, yeah.
the
Batman Beyond
it takes that genre that is mostly supposed to be shut your brain off and have a good time, and injects enough of it to where it doesn't feel pretentious or like it's betraying the source material, but it makes it so that you go into experience even maybe expecting one thing, but you come out of that going, oh, I got something more than I expected to get going into that. That was great.
I think Chris Nolan slowly experienced. He ratcheted it up a little bit. Like with Batman Begins, it was all about how Bruce Wayne saves the guy who ultimately becomes the bad guy, basically, right? Yeah, he helps him out. Like the house burned down and all that. But he had a choice. He could have let him die, but he saved him. And was that the right choice or not? Because this guy came back and wreaked havoc later on. And the idea being well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but we'll say that this is Batman's morals and nothing, he wouldn't anyways. And then the next one is okay, let's have this clash of ideologies between Joker and Batman, and sort of
risking other people's lives to follow your ideology.
Exactly. Yeah. But then in Dark Knight Rises, I feel like they actually took it a little too far, which maybe it would explain why that one didn't. Because then they came back and they're oh, what he did in Dark Knight Rises was not the right decision.
Not the right thing.
And it led to all these things, and they totally did the wrong thing, but it kind of... they shouldn't have done that. They should have done something else.
No, there's something interesting.
It was a little too...
There's something interesting to that.
It just wasn't... It made for less good of a movie, I guess. But he continued to take his philosophical leanings further and further and further until he made his last Batman movie, and then was okay, we're done.
Yeah.
That's a movie where the philosophy was definitely more important than the logical flow of plot.
Yeah,
I think so. And
that's why it bothered me.
They philosophically teleport a character at half.
That's totally.
Well,
I use the power of philosophy to appear here now because in order for my philosophy to be addressed within the current set of
the philosophy of chiropractor back. What do they call it? Punching someone in the back to heal their broken back. That's the new philosophy.
Oh my god!
You just punch someone's back and they're good.
That fetching movie.
This is the key to life.
Gosh. Movie was really had some problems.
Actually, just a last example, because we're talking about Chris Nolan. Dunkirk, to me, was a good example of a little bit of this moral ambiguity because, I don't know, if you care about Dunkirk, there's a character who's basically not supposed to be there. And there's a dilemma where it's they could choose to get rid of a guy who's not supposed to be there anyways, or essentially maybe an entire group could die but not kill this guy. It's like a trolley problem kind of thing. Switching the tracks and all that. But I don't know. I like that wasn't what the whole movie was about. But there was a really crucial scene that just really injected something extra into the movie for me that I really enjoyed. That's another example, I think, of something where I think it works really well. It's not what the whole movie's about.
And the movie doesn't try to answer the question either.
And they don't.
Right.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. That's always been my philosophy on Star Trek. I don't know how much Star Trek you guys have watched. I've become a pretty giant Star Trek fan in later years. I was much more a Star Wars kid and thought Star Trek was kind of dumb, and have sort of almost totally reversed my position on that now, because the television shows, way more than the movies, really are all about philosophy.
They explored that pretty heavy.
It's basically like a philosophy show that's dressed in a science fiction set. And so the best Star Trek is the Star Trek that does not try to answer the questions that it sets out. When it tries to tell you what's right and wrong, it's always really stupid.
I guess we're all the same after all, and that's how it ends. Yeah, those are the worst.
It always just ruins the whole thing and just comes off as super preachy and just way in your face and down your throat. with something you maybe don't even agree with, and that is not like intrinsically wrong. And to put the position that it is just irritating.
Yeah, robots aren't humans, man. Can't become
But when it is at its best, I feel, is when it presents an issue, and then the events happen and you don't know at the end, or at least it doesn't tell you. Maybe you think you know, and that's the good part, is that you
you've kind of worked it through in your head a little.
But the show doesn't try to tell you the right answer, and so that scene in Dunkirk you're talking about, I think, does that really, really well.
Yeah.
Where it's like you know, it's the same dilemma like you're saying with the trolley. You're there face to face with someone. It's a lot harder to
make that call. Yeah.
Intuitively, saving more people is better than saving one person. I see this person's face, and I don't see their faces, and it's way harder to make that choice when I'm right here with someone. I could see the fright in their eyes or whatever. Yeah. So, yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, it makes for great entertainment. So.
Exactly.
It does.
It did.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the end of our podcast.
Oh, jeez, guys.
We made it through. And I think for the most part, we covered just about everything we went over last week.
I mean, yeah, we did a pretty
might have been a thing or two.
I wasn't here last week, so it's like chaos theory at work. It's like I add an extra pendulum to the thing, and then it's flipping weird ways.
But yeah, great questions as always. Thank you so much for asking and for giving us great topics to talk about. Your participation in the show makes it a lot better. So please feel free to share more with us, whether that's on Patreon, that's where we go first, or whether in the comments here on YouTube, we check that too. Another really great place is joining our Discord server and putting your question in the podcast chat channel on our Discord server. So any way you want to, reach out to us and give us something that you'd like us to talk about.
You could write us a letter too if you want.
Send a letter.
Send a letter.
Snail mail. It's traditional.
That's what Amy Hennig would do.
Talk about not being changing with the times.
Yeah, exactly.
But hey, you would definitely get on the podcast.
The post office falls into that to some degree. They're not happy with all this email and freaking drones delivering packages. What? That's not right, man. That's not right.
Cars?
All these drone developers or engineers, you need to stop that. That's wrong.
They need to stop it.
AAA mail service.
Now I can't make it AAA mail service freaking going under, dude.
Oh jeez.
Anyways, thank you for watching our podcast. We'll see you guys again next week. Have a great weekend. Peace out.
See ya.